Monday, May 13th, 2024, 4:46 p.m. The sky continues to rumble, only small pauses in between each burst of thunder. The consistency and cadence is not unlike the sound of helicopters overhead in the city of Los Angeles, although the ferocity, the force, the sheer power of it all is far more terrifying. Today is the first day since arriving in Houston, Texas 5 days ago, where I had a moment to stop and take it in. While 5 days have gone by in a flash, time has also moved slower in some ways since I've been here. I feel this far more often these days. I have not traveled to DJ in a long time, other than if I was already headed somewhere and called in a favor for a spot. I came here because I had an offer to entertain people with great music and make a few bucks. What more can you ask for? Besides the company of a beautiful woman, of course. I had no idea or expectations about what Houston would be like. My only reference to the city come from lyrics by Devin the Dude and the Ghetto Boys, amongst a few other Houston artists. I flew in Wednesday night from LAX. While waiting in the rideshare zone after landing, I struck up a conversation with a woman wearing an Ashley Babbitt was murdered t-shirt and a Free the January 6th political prisoners backpack. She was a high school science teacher from Long Beach, fed up with the California school system, who was moving to Houston. She was very pleasant to talk to. Ironically, this would be the only political discussion or really anything even politically adjacent I witnessed the entire trip. Two Californians. I also saw a young priest get into an Uber before my driver, a young man named Abdul from Afghanistan, arrived. We talked about Houston and where he was from originally. He works 2 jobs, 7 days a week. I asked him what he does for fun, and he didn't even really understand the question. He told me he never takes a day off and helps to support 23 of his family members in Texas and Afghanistan. He did not have any air of complaint or anger about it. It was very matter of fact. I surmised that in comparison to where he came from, life here is a breeze. It's easy to forget this sometimes. I took this in as he drove me to my destination for a week of relatively easy work and leisure. I dropped my bags where I was staying and headed to a place called Avant Garden, where I would be playing a week later on the final night of my trip. The first thing I heard as I walked inside was a Kendrick Lamar set. Kendrick Lamar's music was everywhere I went during this trip. However, Drake's music was also played frequently and to no less enthusiasm, often immediately following Kendrick's music. To me, this is the appropriate response. I linked with Scratchy Scratch, whom I met a couple years ago in Los Angeles with my friend Waldo. You often hear the term Southern hospitality. I am born and raised in California, and I have not spent any real time in the South. It is indeed very real. If there was a single ambassador for me as a DJ on this trip, it was Scratch. Around 3 a.m., he took me to a family restaurant called Chapultec Lupita. It's the type of place you only know if you live here. After hours, it's mostly DJs and cops, Scratch told me. Outside was a car that read Constable on the side. I didn't even know there was such a thing. This is where I had my first taste of Texas queso, which I learned Houstonians are very serious about. It wasn't until the next day I realized the street I was staying on was called Asbury. What a great omen. Thursday night, my first gig, Off the Record. Off the Record has been open about 6 months in downtown Houston. The entrance to the venue is an actual mini record store. The room is adorned with artifacts all dedicated to music. Speakers of various sizes, colors, and shapes create a mosaic on the wall behind the bar. On the left wall, facing the bar, LPs, singles, and 45s from many eras and genres adorn shelves all the way to the ceiling. The hallway outside the restrooms are covered with black and white images of some of the most iconic and important musicians of all time. Upstairs is a separate lounge known as George's Music Room, dedicated to George Daniels, the uncle of David Anderson, one of the owners of Off the Record. George is a Houston music icon who owned one of the largest independent music stores in the country called George's Music Room. His story is deserving of his own episode, and perhaps one day I'll get to meet him. As for the night itself, I wasn't sure where to take it. As I have said before, you never really know how far it can be took until you take it there. Somewhere in between the first sea breeze and the last beer, I had that room singing. From what I remember, it was a fantastic night, and I feel like this place may be one of the great rooms for DJs to really showcase their range, creativity, and personality. I hope to come back here again many times. Friday evening, May 10th, 2024. I'm beginning to recognize that Houston is a drinking town. I really can't put it any other way. Depending on your view of alcohol as a vice, you could consider that a good thing or a bad thing. I, myself, enjoy responsibly indulging in spirits. I have never been anywhere in America besides Las Vegas, which does not count, where there are this many bars and this many people in them. Granted, Houston is a massive city, and I was only there for 8 days, so I suppose there are areas without a lot of places to drink alcohol within the city limits, but I did not see those parts. Pound for pound and hour for hour, it's every bit as hard drinking and hard partying as any city I have been. I met Waldo for a beer at a sports bar called Little Woodrow's. I've known Waldo for almost 15 years. He moved to Houston in 2020 and has made himself somewhat of a fixture in the DJ community out here. He's almost an ambassador to those of us visiting from Los Angeles, whether he chooses to admit it or not. The waitresses flirted with us relentlessly as there was very few customers in the bar. One of them looked me in the eyes and told me that she was in love with me. I think she was just trying to get me to give her some more money for a tip. It worked. Friday night, I played a very nice restaurant called the Warwick in an area known as the Galleria, a large upscale shopping district. I was mostly there just to provide groovy dining music to a very full restaurant of smartly dressed people. I couldn't help but notice a large portion of the tables were occupied by groups of beautiful women, enjoying girls' night, I presumed. After I finished, the man who brought me out here to work took me around the city. Steve Rogers is a nightlife and leisure impresario and restaurateur, born and raised in Houston. He's part owner or investor in at least 7 places in the city, 4 of which I got to work. I would say he was akin to the mayor, but I don't think most politicians have the same level of respect, admiration, or reverence that he does. We went to about a half a dozen different places, from rooftop bottle clubs, cigar lounges, speakeasies, and hipster-esque alternative dance clubs, for lack of a better term. Every place we went, he knew people, and people knew him. Outside one spot, an older gentleman in a suit said, "That's the man right there," as he pointed to Steve. I agree, and not just because he put some dough in my pockets. I was staying right off a street called Washington Avenue, in an area known as the Heights. During the day, it was pretty quiet, very little traffic. There were at least 24 bars and clubs in a half-mile vicinity, and I saw 3 currently under construction. It was hard to imagine there are enough people to fill them, but Friday night, it was easy to see indeed there were. Saturday, May 11th, 2024. 3 p.m. I was back to work for a day party at 5015, a well-known indoor-outdoor space in the 3rd Ward. As I approached the entrance, security asked me what was in my bag. I told them I was there to DJ. They both said, "You're DJing here?" I said yes. They looked perplexed. It may be partially because of my complexion. I was one of the only non-melanated people there. Or it could be the way I was dressed, which has been described as a combination of Kramer, Magnum PI, and Craig Sager. Rest in peace. The crowd at 5015 was from all over the country. The MC, Kane, for the day was shouting out various cities to loud cheers. A table from Detroit, a group from North Carolina, Jersey, Florida, and about 5 or 6 other cities I can't recall. One thing I distinctly remember him saying on the mic was, "Do not leave Houston on Sunday. We eat pancakes in the morning, then we party from 2 p.m. to 2 a.m., then we go eat pancakes again before we go to work. Do not miss Sunday Fun Day in Houston." I mostly set the table musically at this place. I played an assortment of cool R&B and soul classics, but by the time I finished, the crowd was ready to turn up, and the DJ after me obliged. On my way out, the security I met on the way in both laughed and said, "You did your thing," and shook my hand. Looks, as we all know, can be deceiving. Saturday night, I ventured out on my own. For as many clubs, large bars, and sports bars in the area I was staying that there were surprisingly few dive bars. I am always in search of a good, dark, dirty dive. I found a pretty decent one in a place called Underdogs, a dimly lit bar with cheap drinks. It was sparsely filled. The bartender, whose name I didn't get, had his own line of spices for sale behind the bar, so of course I purchased all 3 of his Mui Duong blends. That's about all I remember from the rest of the night. Sunday, May 12th, 2024. Mother's Day. Rock House Southern Kitchen, another of Steve's fine establishments. I got to play my bread and butter Sunday music here, funk and soul grooves from the 70s and 80s. It was mostly families, all dressed in fine clothes and in fine spirits to match. This is just perfect for me. The right amount of groove to move you in your seat, but not so much that you can't eat. When I finished, the band hit the stage, and my work was done for the day. I linked with a crew of merry men at a karaoke spot in Midtown, had a few, sang a song, and we hit the streets. Eastside Corey, aka Good Grief, took us to a place called Khan's, a unique little sake and beer bar in a strip mall. This is the type of place I never would have found on my own. The crew of merry bandits were the only people in the place until an absolutely fantastic blues 3-piece came in and played some of the best live music I've heard in a long time. There was a book on the bar that read, "Tell Me Your Secrets," filled with anonymous handwritten confessions, drawings, and bits of wisdom. Of course, I left a few words of my own. We followed that up with a stop at a dark but colorfully lit place called Sixes and Sevens. They had very cheap drinks, and since I had not eaten dinner, I ordered the spaghetti sandwich with a side of curly fries off their stoner-friendly menu. It was not the worst thing I ever ate. We met and mingled with a few folks, hit maybe 2 or 3 other places which I can't really recall, then finally ate some tacos at a truck that served their sauce in little bags like billets of heroin. The MC from Saturday was not exaggerating. Houston goes very hard on Sunday Fun Day. Monday, back where we started. With no obligations till late Monday night, I walked for some coffee. Really got my first taste of temperamental Texas weather. The first few days I was here were pretty hot and somewhat humid, but they were pretty consistent. Monday was overcast and humid. I went to eat lunch at a beautiful cantina called El Tiempo. By the time my lunch arrived, there was a torrential downpour, thunder and lightning, and intense gusts of wind. By the time I finished eating, the sun was back out. Monday night, I was a guest for Scretch and Waldo's weekly party, me, you, and Waldo, at a place called Dean's in downtown. This is my kind of place and my kind of night. Dimly lit, nice decor, not too big, cheap drinks, cool people who want to hear different music. The staff here was very cool as well, which I can say was the case everywhere I worked or went. In fact, people were pretty damn cool everywhere. All the Lyft drivers were great, and I had some of my most insightful conversations about Houston with them. It's where I learned the term sweet blood, which I would later become aware I also possessed. Fucking mosquitoes were feasting on my flesh. Sorry for swearing. We had a round robin of DJs, Waldo, Corey, Brian Rhymes, Scretchy, and myself, each doing our own thing, but it all fit together nicely. I noticed a very strange mannequin display outside the bar next door. I was compelled to investigate. What happened next, I can confidently say, was the strangest, most unique, and most fascinating bar I had ever been in my life by far. I plan to return here one day for a more in-depth look and to find out the story behind it. For now, I will just say it was part museum, part gallery, part living theater. There was a guy repairing electronics. There were shoe boxes. It felt like a hallucination, a fever dream, but it was real. Corey and I walked to another place down the street called La Carafe, a historical landmark, so he could buy a pack of cigs. We didn't stay for a drink, but I intend to come back here next time as well. There was also a drawing here that looked very much like me. We went back to Dean's and turned that fucking place on its ear. I don't know if that's an actual expression, but it feels right. Then we went to eat after, had some laughs, and I passed out around 4 a.m. Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. I was slug-like for most of the day, slow-moving, tired, useless. That evening, I met up with one of my oldest and dearest friends, Rocky, whom I have known since we were 5 years old. He's been living in Houston for about 12 years. He has a family of his own now, like most of my childhood friends. We rarely see each other. We linked up and talked about life and kvetched to each other about our problems and stresses and had many laughs over beers. Then we went and ate sushi and drove around for a while and reminisced. Later we hit a place called Lolas Depot, a filthy yet charming dive in Montrose. It's been open since the early 80s. It was mostly filled with younger people, but it had the feeling of a place with a history where most of the people who come here now are likely unaware of. I met a man named Keith. He told me he was one of the only people who had been coming here still since the early days. I learned that the majority of the people who used to frequent this place are no longer alive. The walls were adorned with pictures of many of them, somewhat of a mausoleum. Some people may not consider this an ideal memorial, but I feel differently. I have a very close departed friend myself who has his picture in the place he frequented most in the years before his death. Many people come to bars and die, not in the bar, but they go to bars and they also die. But only those who were truly loved are immortalized on the walls of such places. Often, it is the only place where they were truly loved, where they truly felt loved, and the only place they truly loved being. Drinks were cheap and strong the way they should be. The bathrooms were filthy, and there was a genuine feeling of "fuck it, man" in the air. Outside, there was a massive patio with a whole other scene going on. Someone was selling t-shirts, and on a bar that wasn't in use, a man had an array of beads, buttons, pins, rings, earrings, necklaces, and other various jewelry items for sale. I never did figure out if the people inside were aware he was selling stuff or not. I found a very striking oval button, and the man made me a necklace out of it for a mere $15. Before calling it a night, Rocky took me to a place I never would have otherwise known existed. On the Rice University campus, where he went to school a few years earlier, there is a bar called the Valhalla. It opened in 1970. It is entirely staffed by graduate students and alumni. I learned that Rocky bartended here while he attended. Beers are only $1. Nobody actually makes money, and bartenders tend to work only 1-hour shifts. All profits go to throwing monthly parties for all the bartenders. There are over 100 of them in total. It's essentially an anti-frat bar, a place for people to get together and drink and enjoy each other's company. The support columns are adorned with the cut ties of Rice graduates. It's a beautiful place with a lot of history, and I felt lucky to have seen it. We parted ways, and again, I was reminded about time. This grown man, this beautiful man, whom I remember vividly jumping on the trampoline with in his backyard 30 years ago, stood before me, a full-fledged adult. I have managed to avoid most portions of this reality by remaining unmarried and without children. Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. The last night and day of my trip. On the way back last night, I saw a bunch of vintage stores on a street called Westheimer. I am always looking to add more shirts to my ever-growing collection. I took an Uber back to the Montrose area. It was very hot and dry outside. Some describe this area as being similar to Los Angeles. I can see the comparison, particularly to Silver Lake. There's art everywhere, lots of vintage clothing stores and boutiques, coffee houses, and of course, more bars. I went to half a dozen stores in search of the next great button-up for my collection, to no avail. Then I found one of the greatest antique stores I've ever had the pleasure to step foot in. I spent about an hour at BJ's Antique and barely scratched the surface of the treasures inside. Art, toys, records, collectibles of all variety, furniture, trinkets, and tchotchkes. I picked up a few keepsakes. If I stayed any longer, I would have spent a lot more money. I'll definitely return. Wednesday night. Back to the first place I came when I arrived here a week ago. Waves on Brand. A weekly event cultivated and presented by Scretch, his brother Rudy, DJ Motivation, and DJ Candlestick. Avant Garden is a large 2-story villa converted into an event space. It looks and feels like a home far more than it does a bar or club. Outside, there is a very large patio where they host a weekly poetry open mic night till 10:30 p.m. It was more crowded than any poetry event I ever saw. Had I known this, I would have liked to read some of my work. Perhaps next time. After the poetry, they have DJs out on the patio, as well as vendors selling art, clothing, crafts, and jewelry. The crowd is extremely diverse in appearance and in age. Inside downstairs, there's another DJ. And finally, upstairs, a third room where I would be playing. Once it got going in there, it really felt like a house party. I took it where it needed to go, and the people went right along with me. It was a beautiful finale to cap off a great week. Many of the new friends I made over the last week came out to party with us. One, Tony Maiden, who I met a few nights earlier, had overheard me discussing how I neglected to eat any Texas barbecue my whole trip. This was unacceptable to him. He said he would bring us some barbecue the last night, and he prepared us some delicious plates. We ate them out of the bed of his truck in the parking lot of a vegan restaurant next to the bar. This further solidified the idea of Southern hospitality as more than just an expression. Not to sound corny, but I went to sleep with a full heart and a full stomach. My returning flight home was delayed almost 3 hours, and we narrowly avoided a tornado that touched down and did some pretty serious damage about 30 minutes after we took off. On the flight back, I began to reflect on the past week. There seems to be a spirit of celebration which exists here on a level I can't recall experiencing anywhere else in my relatively limited travels. I spend the majority of my time alone. Even when I'm playing music for a large group of people, I'm isolated from them. While on this trip, every time I left the house, I was in the company of others who were explicitly trying to look after me, make sure I was taken care of, fed, having a good time. This is a strange feeling. It is both wonderful to not be alone, but also a reminder of how comfortable and accustomed I am to it. Even when I was on my own during the trip, I didn't feel alone. Like any place, it's the people that make it what it really is.